Vice President J.D. Vance sat down for an interview with ABC anchor George Stephanopoulos on Sunday, and it didn't go well. Stephanopoulos pressed Vance on the allegations of border czar Tom Homan taking a allegedly $50,000 bribe.
Now, Vance denied the claim and called it, quote, a ridiculous smear. That's when things just started to get heated.
You were focused on a bogus story. You're insinuating criminal wrongdoing against a guy who has done nothing wrong instead of focusing on the fact that our country is struggling because our government's shut down. Let's talk about the real issues, George. I think the American people would benefit much more from that than from you going down some weird left-wing rabbit hole where the facts clearly show that Tom Homan didn't engage in any criminal wrongdoing.
It's not a weird left-wing rabbit hole. I didn't insinuate anything. I asked you whether Tom Homan accepted $50,000, as was heard on an audio tape recorded by the FBI in September 2024, and you did not answer the question. Thank you for your time this morning.
No, George, I said that I don't.
Up next, we'll be right back.
You can see at the end there, Vance gets cut off as ABC goes to commercial break. The vice president later took to X to reiterate his point. He writes, peace in the Middle East, China threatening critical supply chains, government shutdown. George S. doesn't care about that. He's here to focus on the real story, a fake scandal involving Tom Homan. Over to News commended Vance for his response, saying VP Vance absolutely dismantled George Stephanopoulos on live TV after he tried to smear border czar Tom Homan with a bogus bribery narrative. Within seconds, Vance flipped the script, exposed why the media is really going after Homan.
Now, the case against Homan goes back to 2024, alleging that he took $50,000 in cash from undercover FBI agents. Homan most recently said last month that, quote, he did nothing criminal, but he stopped short of denying that he took the money at all. Vance repeatedly says in the interview he doesn't know if Homan took the money or not, but he's sure that no crime was committed. Democrats weren't very convinced by that answer. New Jersey Senator Andy Kim writes on Blue Sky, quote, if that's the best talking point that White House lawyers could come up with to prep BP for a Sunday show, I think we know what the real answer is. Release the Homan tape.
Well, he answered the question that Vance did, that the administration's position is nothing illegal was done, and
but why is saying yes or no to the money?
He said he didn't have enough relevant information to answer that question. It's a fine question. I don't have any problem with Stephanopoulos asking him about it, but he got an answer from Vance, and he just continued on. He was only interested in talking about that, and Vance eventually got I don't think impolite about it, was just, well, I've told you what I know, and let's move on to something else. And Stephanopoulos didn't want to do that, so then Vance, got into why you're failing in low ratings and no one cares, and that's fine. And then he tried to get the last word and cut him off, which was rude, but it's his show, so.
So Vance should know the answer to that. There's tax implications even when you accept $50,000. And in order to report your tax income, it's mandatory to get a job at the White House and be in the administration, right? They should have combed through all your files. So that's an easy phone call for Vance to find out if he ever accepted the money after months of talking about this. I mean, $50,000 is nothing to sneeze at. So they should know, even if it was a gift or a bribe, it's something you must report on your taxes. It's the law. And so he should know that. He shouldn't be, don't know.
There's no way he has the money was kept by him, I don't think.
Well, it's just to be that simple. Yes or no, that he should know. It should be reported, or was it not reported on your taxes?
Accepting the money, I don't think there's any way he has the money.
The accusation is explosive, so it's worth talking about.
It's that an undercover FBI agent essentially tried to trap him.
Gave him $50,000 stuffed in an alleged Kava bag, which is the food store, stuffed it in there, handed it to him, and he accepted it. And so it's like with that was an exchange to do what the undercover FBI allegedly wanted you to do.
Right, but the undercover FBI agent is not a sincere deal because the person is the
right,
FBI.
But this is not about Democrats or Republicans. This is about no one wanting a government in which officials accept bribes in order to do different things in government.
Lindsay,
I wouldn't want that
to... If I put, a couple $20 bills in here, handed this to you.
I'm not a government official.
Put your hand out.
So I take your money for sure.
Gotcha. Pull her away.
I'm not a government official. If you say, Lindsay, be nice to me today and give me $60, I can do that because you know what? I'm not a government official.
But I'm saying you might just accept it because I caught you.
So then just say you took the money. Just say you took the money. People are asking.
But that might be. You see how it might be technically taking the money, but it was not a criminal matter.
There was
should not have been schemed and gamed out by the FBI in the first place, trying to entrap this official?
You give a lot of grace when you want to, and that's fine. But
I'm just skeptical of the FBI. I'm skeptical of law enforcement. Didn't the left used to be skeptical of law enforcement?
I'm skeptical of it too.
Doesn't the FBI entrap people?
I don't think that we should just completely move away from the topic just because we're skeptical of law enforcement. We should definitely still have a conversation about whether or not Tom Homan was being investigated at the time, because President Trump said, we're done with this, like, move on. Was it worth the investigation? You like to see things through. You want Letitia James to be looked into, and if she's innocent, she's innocent. And so same thing with Tom Homan. Let's keep the same energy. I think a red flag for me.
I am not standing in the way of an investigation of this whatsoever. I would
the president is.
Certainly like to know more information.
The administration is. Fine. And the first red flag for me was that Caroline Leavitt went and she gave an inconsistent response in the beginning to the allegations. She said specifically, she told reporters that he did not accept the money. And now the answer has changed, obviously, as advised by lawyers, to he did nothing criminal. And that's what you heard J.D. Vance say. That's what you heard Homan say. And that's the same thing as when somebody's like, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth. It feels very much like you were coached by a lawyer to not get in trouble because you did allegedly accept the money. Now, while I think that ABC could have certainly done a better job and George Stephanopoulos asking more questions about some more pressing issues and making that the priority for the conversation, I don't think that the Homan conversation should have been off the table just because J.D. Vance is uncomfortable with answering that question that he easily could have gotten an answer to about whether that man accepted $50,000.
I want to know what prompted the FBI to put together this
I'd love to know that, too.
Isn't that interesting?
I would love to know that.
Do they just routinely do this to every major political figure?
Maybe somebody tipped them off, though.
Tipped him off to what?
That he was accepting bribes to do business.
So he's accepted other bribes.
I don't know. I can't make that up.
But I'm saying that is not the accusation. The accusation is that this bribe,
yes,
it was not actually a real bribe because it was from law enforcement.
Okay, so
I'm saying what made them decide to do that?
Let's use an example. If you're a cop trying to get a drug dealer, and you sell the drug dealer drugs to try to get him in an act,
right,
then you catch him like that. But because someone told you he was selling drugs, or there's some proof that he was selling drugs, so that's the same thing.
Okay, but that
I'm not saying.
But I haven't seen that in none of the reporting. Have they said the FBI decided to conduct a sting because they had evidence that Tom Homan had been previously accepted? Do you know what I'm saying?
Which is why I want to see more information be released. But President Trump and the administration canceled the entire investigation, so we will never know why they were looking into Tom Homan. And even if it was just this Democratic hoax, like President Trump likes to call everything, let us find out. Let us know and tell us the information. But instead, everyone's saying he didn't commit a crime. He didn't commit a crime. And so that looks interesting and looks different as a response to when President feels he's 100% accurate about something being a hoax, and he says that out loud.
If Trump phoned in an anonymous tip to the FBI, like Adam Schiff's accepting bribes, the FBI would just put together a sting and see if they could get him to accept a bag full of money.
If the FBI is full of
I think you
Trump
would have a problem
administration's
with
team,
that if they did that.
I do, but I want to look into what's actually available. Like we're talking about Letitia James, her niece lived in her home. So I think that's a problem with trying to prosecute her. I'm trying to figure out why Tom Homan was being looked into.
Well, now who's being selective about
No, I said show me the smoke where the fire. Her niece lives in her home. So we can follow through with this, but her niece lives there. And this is on the record. What is Tom Homan doing? He won't say whether or not he accepted the funds, whether it was undercover or not. He won't say what led them to investigate him. Everyone's being quiet.
Unless he accepted, again, if he actually accepted bribes in some other context, again, he didn't accept a bribe here because it was not actually a bribe. It was the FBI doing it. It was not a real thing. No animals were harmed in the making of this sting.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth getting some pushback from his own former employer, that's Fox News, over his new rules for the press.
Fox signed on to a statement from ABC, NBC, CBS, and CNN saying that none of them would agree to new Pentagon press rules, saying, quote, "The policy is without precedent and threatens core journalistic protections." So far, One American News has been the only media outlet to sign.
Despite the pushback, Hegseth and the Pentagon still insist that the new rules are a reasonable request in the interests of national security. But retired General Jack Keane rejected that idea on Fox News last night.
What they're really doing, they want to spoon feed information to the journalists, and that will be their story. That's not journalism. Journalism is going out and finding the story and getting all the facts to support it. And no one's going to walk in and bang on a door of a four-star general or senior civilian policy leader in the Pentagon. I never had that, but I did have journalists chasing a story of something that was going on in the Army, and those things were legitimate.
But Department spokesperson Sean Parnell says the claim that the Pentagon wants to spoon-feed stories is a lie. He writes on X, "It should come as no surprise that the mainstream media is once again misrepresenting the Pentagon's press procedures. Let's be absolutely clear. Journalists are not required to clear their stories with us. This claim is a lie. Have an escort in sensitive areas. Wear a press credential. Don't encourage our people to violate Department of War policy. Pretty simple." And some on the right say that they agree. Eric Doherty of Florida Voice News posted this to X after the Associated Press and New York Times refused to sign Monday, writing in part, "Okay, kick them out. Access to the Pentagon without basic security measures is not a right."
The deadline to acknowledge Hegseth's new rules was yesterday, and for those who have not signed, he has promised to evict them from the building today. So I think this is really an interesting story, Amber. We should, I think, in the interest of full transparency, say The Hill has declined to sign and the Daily Caller, your news organisation, has also declined to sign. It's only One American News that has signed up. I was kidding offline about welcoming you to the resistance and all of that, but to be a bit more serious, I actually do think it is to the credit of the Daily Caller, of Fox News, and a couple of other conservative-leaning outlets that they have declined to sign this policy, which I certainly see as a heavy-handed attempt to essentially prohibit reporters from reporting all but the most acceptable or cleared news.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the problem with the policy is that it goes way too far. I think it's understandable that the Pentagon wants to prevent leaks of classified information, but that's a question of making sure your own employees are not doing that, not of trying to hamstring the press. And my understanding, I have not been a Pentagon reporter, is that the hallway that they are asking reporters to get escorted around has always been open for the press to roam freely, and it even is apparently labeled that it's basically the reporter's
corridor,
the press corridor.
Right.
So basically, to go from the briefing room to the office where all of the press desks are set up, they now have to have an official walking with them. And in addition, it says not just that classified leaks are prohibited, but that the press is not allowed to report on any classified or unclassified information that is not approved by a Pentagon official. So I was just thinking, well, what would this mean for previous major national security stories? When Edward Snowden did his infamous leaks proving that the NSA was spying on Americans, the press would, if they published that under this policy, be prohibited from further accessing the Pentagon. And so that's really the danger here in restricting that type of reporting.
Right. And to that point, I think that a lot of the purported security concerns that the Pentagon and Pete Hegseth are claiming here were already honoured by news organisations in previous iterations before this policy. So this idea, for example, that the press was sort of roaming into areas where they were not permitted, and this sort of rather dramatic image of the media as if they're just sort of sneaking into people's offices. That was not happening. Reporters at the Pentagon wear badges as it is to identify themselves. There have been numerous instances in the past where news organizations have discovered things that are classified and have had discussions with the administration of the day as to whether they can permissibly report that without endangering people's lives. And that's, of course, a valid concern. But this seems to me a lot more about chilling genuine reporting and trying to control access in a way that infringes not only on press freedom, but on the public's right to know what this organisation that has massive funding is of massive importance is actually doing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And this is not the first time that we have seen an administration try to curtail press freedom. During the previous administration, there were 400 hard passes to the White House that were revoked from various press organizations and individuals. And then, of course, there was the scandalous Obama administration spying on journalists who were reporting on similar information. So although not without precedent, obviously concerning. And I think the fact that there's only been one outlet that's signed on to this and that is going to be present in the Pentagon is probably going to force them to rethink this, because whatever type of coverage you want, whether it's positive or negative. And sometimes administrations, don't mind negative coverage if it means that what they're doing is getting out to the public, or that they're getting some attention for what's going on. As some would say, all press is good press. Well, in this case, there's potentially no press.
Right, and I wonder how that's going to be received by President Trump, actually, because for all his blasts at the media, he loves media attention.
Right.
And the fact that this has gone so far where organizations like your own, like Fox News, are declining to sign and therefore will presumably be barred from going there, what impact will that have? I also think it looks pretty bad for One American News to be the sole people who have signed up to this. So I think that's part of the picture as well. As far as previous administrations, I think it's fair to raise all those issues. I would have bigger problems with the Obama era spying or surveillance. The issue of press passes in the last administration was a bit cloudy to me because it wasn't clear whether those were people who were simply not showing up to use those passes. I'm not persuaded that was viewpoint discrimination or an attempt to silence the press, but certainly it is valid to cite previous examples.
Yeah, I think one of the bigger concerns actually during the Biden administration, in addition to the revocation of White House hard passes, was they had a very restrictive COVID policy when it came to attending press briefings. So it was very difficult for smaller outlets to be able to attend. So at the time I was working for The Spectator, we were basically a startup in the United States, and yet we were expected to pay for a daily COVID test at a cost of $150 just to be able to access the briefing room, which obviously was prohibitively expensive for us. And so sometimes these rules that are seemingly done for the reason of public health or what have you ended up disproportionately punishing outlets who do not have these massive budgets or are not owned by corporations or billionaires.
Raising the bar for access without saying so. Yeah, fair enough.
If this war's not going to get settled, I'm going to send them Tomahawks. I may say that. The Tomahawk is an incredible weapon, a very offensive weapon. And honestly, Russia does not need that. They don't need that. Yeah, I may tell them that if the war is not settled, that we may very well do it. We may not, but we may do it. I think it's appropriate to bring up. Yeah.
President Trump indicating during a phone call Sunday that he may give Russian President Vladimir Putin a new ultimatum.
According to Axios, he reportedly told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that if Putin did not resume serious peace talks, then the U.S. would provide Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles. Those missiles would allow Ukraine to strike deep into Russian territory, including in the Russian capital of Moscow. Now, some Republicans say that they're on board with the sale.
Do you believe the United States should supply more weapons to Ukraine right now, including those Tomahawk long-range missiles?
Absolutely. I want more weapons in the hands of the Ukrainians to increase the cost of the war to Putin, hit his refineries, go into Russia deep, and be able to destroy his oil infrastructure.
Now, according to that report, no final decision has been made, but Zelensky has said that any Tomahawk missiles would be used exclusively on military targets. Meantime, Putin said on Sunday in response that giving Tomahawks to Ukraine would be a, quote, completely new, qualitatively new stage of escalation. And former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev insisted that it's impossible to distinguish between Tomahawk missiles carrying nuclear warheads and conventional ones after their launch. And according to Reuters, he wrote on social media, quote, "How should Russia respond? Exactly," appearing to hint that Moscow's response would be nuclear.
Well, Russia has an easy way to get out of this, and they can even keep the territory that they conquered in Ukraine. They just have to make a peace deal. I support President Trump and agree with his negotiating tactics here. He doesn't want to give Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. He doesn't want Ukraine to fire missiles into Russia. That would be an escalation. It would bring us closer to out-and-out conflict with Russia. We don't want that. But I frankly agree with Trump that it shouldn't be taken off the table entirely because Russia is not playing ball right now. Trump's given them every opportunity. He's given Putin every chance to take a really good deal. Not even, they're going to keep the territory. That was part of the deal. And just to protect, and then the rest of Ukraine remains intact. We got Zelensky on board. Zelensky didn't want to agree to give up any part of his country, which was unrealistic, but Zelensky's come around. So Zelensky has made progress. Putin has not made progress. And so I hate to agree with Lindsey Graham because I consider him a warmonger, but at some point we do have to increase the hazard to Russia to continue this because they're not negotiating in good faith. That's what's emerging from this. It's deeply frustrating. It's disappointing. We see that Trump wants to be the peace president, the peacemaker, is charting amazing new ground in the Middle East with Israel and in Gaza, and that's great. He wants to make peace deals Azerbaijan, Armenia. It's all great. But it does take a good faith, concerted effort on the part of the person on the other side. And I don't think Putin is showing that. We're united with our NATO partners, our European friends. So I think Trump should weigh this decision very, very, very carefully. I do not think it is automatically and necessarily a good idea, even if Putin is not negotiating in good faith, to equip Ukraine to strike into the heart of Russia, because what's going to happen is if the war continues, they will eventually lose it. A lot of people are going to die on both sides. This is not good, but as a negotiating tactic to bring Putin back to the table and actually agree to something, that seems all right. I trust the president to handle this matter and to think this through, and we'll see. But we don't want to do this. We don't want to give them Tomahawk missiles because we can't control how they'll be used. They use them on military targets, but we can't control how they'll be used. We don't know how Russia will respond. Russia's hinting that it will consider that the same as like a nuclear strike. That might just be bluster or not. So this is not a road we want to go down.
It's not something you want to find out.
But we can't, if they can't just do whatever they want.
Right.
And have no consequence. I'm sorry, that's not going to be the way it's going to go anymore. And people know watching, I have been the most in support the whole way through of doing a peace deal, even one that's not terrific for Ukraine. And I am all in support of that. I'm not for war. I'm not for escalation. But if they're utterly unwilling, like with Israel and Hamas for a while, I was saying you had two sides that are both pretty unreasonable. And for a while, that was also true in the Ukraine-Russia situation. But Ukraine is not really being unreasonable anymore, frankly. Zelensky has agreed to something that was the best deal they're going to get. He's on board with it. So now it's in Putin's hands, and I'm sorry, but if they're just persisting, well, enjoy missiles.
Well,
right?
I mean, Russia and Putin are acting relentless. I mean, They attacked Ukraine's power grid over the weekend, trying to completely wipe out the country's energy infrastructure. That's an extreme escalation of the attacks. And this is after President Trump has literally rolled out the red carpet for Putin in Alaska and had that meeting after multiple phone calls where they tried to solve this.
And I thought he was right to do that. I supported doing it, but it's not working. It's not
There's
working.
a clear escalation, and so what we're doing is now going back to basically Biden's strategy, which is to support Ukraine, and the same thing that President Trump condescended. And I don't think this is about to get political. Like, this was the best thing at hand because Putin was never going to cooperate, which many people had said, but it wasn't that you should not try. President Trump tried his own way. It didn't work out. And now here we are. But we're at the same standstill that a lot of people called from the beginning and think that if there would have had 9 months of the president being more aggressive towards Putin, we may have been where we're getting right now 9 months ago. When he first walked in, if he came in with the energy and consistently supported Ukraine like President Biden did, perhaps that we would have been further along in this negotiation process.
I reject that
as
this
opposed
is
to further away.
Anything like Biden's strategy. Biden's strategy, the State Department said under Biden that we will support Ukraine to the last man to the end of time. So there was no incentive.
I mean, giving them missiles to them threatening nuclear war, that's the end of time.
We said Ukraine would get whatever it needs regardless, which created a lack of incentive on Ukraine's part to ever negotiate because they got the U.S. backing them. It was unlimited. A pledge to unlimited support until Ukraine takes back all of his territory, which is what Biden wanted, that would be a bad idea. That I'm not advising at all. I support the deal that was on the table. So I think it's frankly not at all the same thing as the Biden administration, but you're right that this is a level of support more significant than had been on the table previously, and it's a reflection of Putin's unwillingness to negotiate.
And I think that no matter what happens here, NATO, the rest of the world, European leaders that are all talking with President Trump.
And he got them to step up.
Yeah, they're looking at how we respond to this as a unit. I'm talking about in Europe and the U.S. and how we respond to Russia. And kind of this sets a precedent for what the next steps will be if Russia does decide to ever try something like this again. And so every step that we take from now on decides whether Russia tells us what to do or we tell Russia what to do. Or if they're at a standstill and we both understand we are superpowers, both with nuclear weapons, and you're not going to continue to bully a place that is so close to our NATO allies. that makes them uncomfortable. And so there's no real winning here unless Putin comes to the table and has a dialogue. And by that, like you said, the threats of escalation and supporting Ukraine have to stay firm, because that's the only way that Putin will continue to lose money and be incentivized to figure out how to come to a solution. He cannot continue on and fight forever. Even if he wins against Ukraine, it'll be long-standing and just get more territory, but years will go on.
Right.
And he will be depleting funds, that they're not just endless.
And we don't want this. We want to make a deal.
Exactly.
That's what we want. But if you're never going to make a deal, then okay, then this is how it's going to be. Then you're not going to take it for free. You're not going to take it without a fight. That's what the Ukrainians want to do. That's what our European peer countries want to do, and that's what we're willing to do. You're going to have to take it with a fight. If you want to take it with a fight, okay. We would love to go a different way, and we must leave the door open to that. So I'm still hoping it can be averted, because our president wants peace. He's the peace president.
Well, they had a lot of different meetings, so I'm not sure. But like you said, never give up hope because of what we just saw happen between Israel and Hamas.
Actress and wife of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Cheryl Hines, got into a testy exchange with Sonny Hostin during her appearance on The View on Tuesday. Hines was on The View to discuss her new memoir, Unscripted. But, of course, the subject of her husband came up. Let's listen.
Your husband is the least qualified Department of Health and Human Services head that we've had in history.
I do not.
I think that's a very dangerous.
Why is he less qualified than an economist?
I think
How is that
he
possible?
is less qualified.
He has spent his career studying toxins, studying people's health, fighting for one guy who was using Roundup for his job.
He has also spread a lot of misinformation, a lot of chaos.
Kennedy has been in the news recently over his efforts to find potential causes of autism. And most recently, Kennedy stated during a cabinet meeting that there were 2 studies that show children who are circumcised early have double the rate of autism. He said that it's likely because they are given Tylenol in the process of healing from those circumcisions. Here's some more of Hines and Hostin's exchange.
We could go back to COVID when...
He's connecting circumcision to autism.
May I finish?
Please.
When Fauci people were saying when you get the vaccine, you cannot transmit COVID. It will stop COVID. And that was disinformation, misinformation.
We were also still learning about it. It was a novel virus we've never encountered before.
Right.
Because now the doctors will acknowledge that
and Dr. Fauci has a medical degree.
Many experts, of course, disagree with Kennedy's suggestions. Founder and medical director of Ocean Pediatrics, Dr. Stephen Ebelowitz, told CBS News, quote, "The conclusion by any credible medical resource is agreeing that there is no causal relationship between Tylenol, circumcisions, or vaccines to autism." Well, I did not expect to be discussing circumcisions with you today, this morning, Amber, but here we are. And Cheryl Hines going on The View. Look, I mean, I've been critical of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. numerous times. I think, although some of his viewpoints regarding, for example, additives in food and so on, I've sympathy for. I do think he has propagated pretty misleading theories about vaccines and autism. And I don't have a whole lot of time for him. I think Cheryl Hines going on The View, good for her. I know she has a book to sell, but she also knew she was entering hostile territory there. And so it proved. What do you make of it all?
It's really interesting. I always find it fascinating in terms of what people expect spouses of political figures to say exactly.
Right.
Like, do they think that she's going to go on The View and disavow her husband?
Right.
If so, they have a very sad view of marriage, I think. But I think she did a good job. She was obviously prepared. She was willing to have that debate with them. She didn't, say, like, I'm not going to talk about my husband's work. She was willing to go there, which I think is really kudos to her. She hasn't spoken much publicly about his tenure at HHS. It was nice to see her defend him. And I think it was interesting when Sonny immediately starts with this pretty hefty accusation that RFK is the least qualified HHS secretary in history. And she goes, well, was an economist more qualified? Or I think the previous one was an attorney. So it was kind of like, What are you talking about, lady?
Yeah, I mean, the Economist thing, just in terms of debate, the Economist response was a good rejoinder. It refers to an Obama-era
I believe
HHS
so,
secretary,
and then
I think.
Becerra was, his entire career was a lawyer.
Okay, so that's a fair point to make. I think also just in terms of the mechanics of debate, going at her on the basis of RFK Jr.'s qualifications, I mean, that's not even the tack I would take if I was trying to do an adversarial interview with Cheryl Hines, because I think the issue is what RFK Jr. believes, what he has propagated, whether those beliefs hold up. I'm generally skeptical of arguments about qualification for political office. It's like when people talk about, in presidential races, well, is he or she qualified to be president? Like, what job actually qualifies you to be president? That seems a highly dubious maneuver. And even to put sort of partisan questions aside, whenever Hillary Clinton ran against Barack Obama for the Democratic nomination in 2008, he was much less qualified in the judgment of me and the plurality of Democratic voters. He was the much better candidate. So that particular criteria for political office, I think, is dubious. I think it's completely valid in things like scientific positions and so on. But to be a cabinet secretary or to run for office, I'm just not so sure about.
Yeah, and I think it gets at this sort of rub between the expert or credentialed class versus a more populist view of politics, which is people who don't have a credential or a specific educational achievement can still be well qualified because they present great ideas or they're able to critically think through problems, and maybe the people who work underneath them are really well qualified experts who can help them execute a vision for the country, which I think is what's happening within HHS. I mean, you'll recall at that announcement about the potential link between Tylenol and autism that's standing around RFK Jr., who himself is not a doctor, were Dr. Marty McCary, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, and Dr. Mehmet Oz, who are all very well qualified and really leaders in their field. And I know
I'm smirking about Dr. Oz because of the pushing of dubious cures,
I understand his television show was not the ideal, but he did have a very accomplished medical career before that. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya was at Stanford, Dr. Marty McCary was at Johns Hopkins. They were both incredibly well respected, and the only reason that people sneer at them now is because in Dr. Bhattacharya's case, he signed on to the Great Barrington Declaration. Dr. Marty McCary also raised questions about the COVID pandemic response, and so they were sort of cast out as doctors that were right-wing or were politicizing medicine, when really they were asking legitimate questions, I think, about what the government was doing in terms of its public health reaction to COVID, and otherwise nobody would have ever questioned their credentials.
The Barrington Declaration, I think, is an interesting debate in and of itself. I do think that it was part of a valid debate. I think there were real dangers to what the people who signed up to that were proposing, but that'll get us down the COVID rabbit hole again, and we'll be there for for quite a long time. I think that the fear that people like myself and other skeptics of RFK have is the idea that he is prone to deciding the conclusion before looking impartially at the evidence. So things like the Tylenol or the circumcisions, or even the idea that a cause for autism will be found within a certain time frame. I think those kind of conditions raise pretty serious questions about whether this is in fact a good faith, rigorous scientific effort or an effort to reach a preordained conclusion.
Journalist and writer Mehdi Hassan sparking controversy for his comparison of the reactions to the war in Gaza to those of the Holocaust.
In a now deleted post on X, Hassan wrote, "One of the ways in which the Gaza genocide is worse than a lot of previous genocides, Rwanda, even the Holocaust, is that you didn't have Hutus or Nazis mocking the genocide after it was over. They were shunned, de-radicalized, and prosecuted." Some people felt that Hassan's tweet was downplaying the significance of the Holocaust. Free Press writer Eli Lake says equating the Shoah to Israel's defensive war against Hamas is something only an anti-Semitic scumbag would do. Hassan responded to Lake, saying, I didn't equate it. I said there was an aspect to it. Ghouls like you mocking the victims. That's worse. I don't defend any genocides, whether Nazi, Hutu, or Israeli. You defend a genocide which makes you the ultimate scumbag is what he said, and history will remember you as a Riefenstahl. That's a reference to Leni Riefenstahl, a German filmmaker who made Nazi propaganda films in the 1930s.
Now, after receiving more backlash, Hassan eventually deleted his initial post. He clarified his argument in another post, saying in part, quote, I was trying to clumsily make the point that Holocaust deniers are rightly condemned and ostracized in the West, while Gaza genocide deniers remain leading members of our political and media establishments. There was no offense meant to the Jewish community, and I abhor and condemn all genocides, unlike those pro-Israel politicians and journalists who defend or worse, deny the current Gaza genocide. Shame on them.
Yeah, it was a bad tweet, and he was right to delete it. I understand what he's trying to say, which is a point I don't agree with, but he was trying to say that he's trying to draw some comparison and say, well, at least after the Holocaust, the Germans were shamed out, or the Nazis were prosecuted and shamed and blah, blah, blah. And now in his view, the perpetrators of this genocide against Gaza are the Israeli government and nothing's going to happen to them. I have been pretty vocal in my criticism of what the Israeli government has done. I think whether you classify it as a genocide or not is a bit beside the point. I would not classify it that way. They were launching a war against a terrorist group. Now, I think far, far, far too many innocent people died in the prosecution of this war against Hamas. I think that elements of the government have in their lack of concern for civilian life have certainly made it seem as if their goal was to wipe out all living people in Palestine. It was very bad. It's kind of beyond the point how you classify it. You should not, there's just no need to start going, it's worse than the Holocaust, or it's worse in this. The Holocaust was the deliberate elimination of the Jewish people, 6 million of whom perished in camps, in death camps. There is no comparison to that. Other things can be very bad without being that bad, but it doesn't matter. Bad things are bad, and we don't need to say, this is worse, this is worse. The Holocaust was horrible, and it's the evil of it, the evil that motivated, should not be understated by anyone. And also, it is wrong to kill civilians, to starve civilians, to bomb and to level a strip just because there's a terrorist group there. So that point did not come across in the tweet, and he was right to delete it, in my view.
I agree. I think, and Mehdi Hassan is motivated in a little bit of a different way than most other people, because what seems to be the writing on the wall is that he left his job at MSNBC because he felt a little bit silenced, and in particular in relation to this story and how to report on the Israel-Hamas conflict. Now, like you said, this started with a terror attack. 1,200 people were killed, and there was an actual and afforded right to respond and retaliate when somebody attacks your country or another part of the world attacks your country. But I think that when people started to watch this play out over 2 years and saw 67,000 people that were mostly civilians, some women and children killed, that were innocent, and hospitals get bombed, and all because, yes, Hamas did have tunnels underneath some of these places, but in some instances they didn't. Well, reporting that was able to access those areas didn't find these claims to be true. Right. So we were just going off of the word of Benjamin Netanyahu, and so it became to the point that the UN started calling it a genocide. And so I think now that we're peeling back the layers on all of this, a lot of the conversation has been about these hostages returning home, which is beautiful to see when you watch everybody reunite with their families, and also the sadness of the people that have hostages that are returning home deceased. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side of that page, and then the same conversation should be the rubble and destruction that Palestinian people are going home to, and the lack of acknowledgement that innocent people were deeply affected. 67,000 of them and their families that cared about them were deeply affected by what the UN describes as a genocide. And so what do we do here and have them consider it in the conversation, excluding Hamas? Because a lot of people, rightfully so feel like Hamas should not be part of the conversation of what they want. And I'm one of those people. But when you talk about Palestinians and what they want and humanizing them, we have to remember that all these people had families and have no homes to go back to. And as they continue to rebuild, it's a situation where we're not even in the conversation on the daily news. There's a lot of conversation about, wow, this is a beautiful day and why Trump should win the Nobel Peace Prize, and because he brought these hostages home. And that's also good, but they're also needs to be consideration for Palestinian people and how they reckon with this horrific tragedy for the people that weren't involved in any terrorism, that were just civilians, that lives got completely sabotaged and destroyed. And I think Mehdi Hassan, like many people, probably feel very personal about that because he doesn't want them to get excluded from the conversation, which you see they're not mostly the headlines in this case. It's mostly just about the one side of it. But there are innocent people that hopefully the world will come together to help rebuild.
Well, and hundreds of them are being released. As part, it was not just as part of the hostage deal. You know, the 20 hostages, the Israeli hostages being held by Hamas were released, and Israel released hundreds of people that it was holding.
Without charge, though. Yeah,
they were holding. Yeah. Yes, it had not charged them. I believe they have also released some people who were believed by the Israeli government to be involved in crime as well. I wonder what kind of incentives that creates for Israel moving forward. If it's going to just...
And it's also hard, Rob, because there's conversations...
Palestinians that would not be a good thing.
That I was telling you about yesterday with Israel Katz, who's the defense minister of Israel, saying they're only blowing up 1/3 of the tunnels, and he wants to go in and blow up the rest of them, which will cause even more destruction after this second phase of this peace plan that President Trump is putting through is instituted. And so just the fact that that's a dialogue happening is concerning to people, probably like Mehdi Hassan, that's like, no more destruction, no more death. Consider the people here and not just the agenda of how to get rid of Hamas. How do you get rid of Hamas without killing any more innocent people? 67,000 is enough. And I think that has to be on the table as President Trump goes to meet with leaders in in Egypt, and everybody on this board of the next phase of Gaza. There has to be a consideration for the people that had livelihoods. They have to be seen as human beings that live there, these children, all these images that we saw, no matter how dramatized the free press wants to act like they were, people saw this with their own eyes. And there has to be a conversation about how to rectify and help people rebuild their lives over there. At the same time, have the conversation about how Israeli people can be whole again and reconnected with their loved ones, and the people that lost loved ones can be whole again.